negative gravity, superstrings of 10 dimensions. What the heck is this stuff? It's simply the artifact of a method of inquiry that is addressing a question beyond its scope. Real science generates common sense answers that anyone can understand and apply. Okay, that's good science. But when science goes bad, then it starts to come up with answers that are just impossible. So this also goes as far as the questions of life are concerned. Okay, if we start to ask questions like, well, how can I get a better job? That's a fairly simple question and can be answered by typical material calculations. Well, get a better degree from a good school. Join a well-respected agency and have people that have good connections, promoting your resume, and so on and so forth. But if we start asking questions like, how can I go to higher realms after my death? Ordinary methods of knowledge can't even begin to address that question. We need a source of knowledge that is commensurate with the scope of the question. So therefore, we have to approach a spiritual source of knowledge like the Vedas. The Vedas are the most ancient, most complete source of spiritual knowledge in the world. They were written down more than 5,000 years ago, and before that they existed in the form of an oral tradition that's much, much older than that. Our internal histories trace back the history of the Vedas more than, well, millions of years. So let's not get into that because, again, that's one of those things that's very hard to prove. But if we use the Vedas and we put them into practical application, we soon find that we're getting benefits far beyond any other system of knowledge. That's the proof. Again, it's subjective, not objective. So the Vedic literature is the most ancient, most complete source of knowledge on, well, everything. So what does the Vedas say about the creation of the universe? Well, that's a long story, but basically the Vedas say that the material energy is emanated by God, and it's fashioned by his agents and servants into the material forms that we observe with our senses. However, most of this process is, again, not subject to our inspection because these agencies are subtle and they do not appear to our gross senses. How do we know this? We have to trust the Vedas. And if we do, we find that we attain higher states of self-realization. I can't prove that to you. You have to find that out for yourself. The point here is that there are different processes of obtaining knowledge. The scientific process of obtaining knowledge is very good as long as it's restricted to its natural domain of sensory phenomena, mechanical things, and small processes that are within the scientist's control. As soon as this process is directed towards something that's beyond their control, then it breaks down and they start getting crazy answers. And any intelligent person can tell that they're crazy because they don't make sense. Okay? We shouldn't listen when the scientists say, oh, quantum mechanics, yes, nobody can really understand it, it's inconceivable. That's not true. If you can calculate the result, then it's conceivable. But just because you have to use certain mathematical tricks to calculate it, that doesn't mean that your equations are describing reality. Just like even the scientists don't really believe that atoms are like a bunch of little billiard balls or electrons. They're sometimes particles, sometimes waves. Those are just mathematical models. Okay, the actual reality is something no one has ever seen and probably never will. No one has seen an electron. An electron is simply a mathematical model that kind of, in most instances, behaves pretty much like reality in experiments. But as soon as the experiments go beyond the ability of the model, the model breaks down and has to be fixed. So similarly, as soon as our experience goes beyond the range of scientific inquiry and laboratory experiments, then the scientific models break down and they start giving wrong answers. But the consciousness, remember, is absolute. Our consciousness is an instrument that can address questions well beyond the domain of experimental science and still give good answers if we have set up our ontology, in other words, our laboratory, correctly. So, yes, there is an empirical process of development and research of consciousness. That process is given in the Vedas. It shows us how to set up a laboratory, how to equip our different experiments, and how to perform them so that we get sensible, realistic results. And we're going to get into all of these things in future episodes of My Perfect Body, because that's the aim here. Now, we have an aim, and the aim is something that is common to every human being. We want to attain a perfect body. That is, a life without problems, a life of full understanding and full pleasure, and a life that doesn't have to end with death and transfiguration, as in material existence. Everybody wants this, but few people have the tools to actually attain it. Most of us waste our time just trying to attain perfection in the material realm, where perfection is unattainable. Therefore, they simply waste their time and live a mediocre existence that's crisscrossed with different problems and difficulties. Well, we don't have to accept this. We can have much better than this, and we should. Therefore, the esoteric teaching exists to connect us with the original source of knowledge about life, the universe, and everything, and that is the Vedic literatures. So by following the model of consciousness given in the Vedic literatures, we find that we can control our destiny, we can control our consciousness, and we can aim towards a higher status of life, which is not subject to the problems of material existence. And this is spiritual life. Spiritual life means eternal existence in a perfect body, in a spiritual world where life is full of happiness, bliss, and knowledge. So we all want that, and we all deserve it. And what we really need is just the information on how to achieve it. And that is the purpose of the esoteric teaching, and that's the purpose of this podcast, is to give you that information. So as we go on, over the next few weeks, I'm going to gradually introduce the techniques and practices that enable you to attain this wonderful state of being, self-realization, or God consciousness, full realization of the self and the eternal existence of spirituality. That's the purpose of life. That's why we're here. Human beings are meant to realize this, and if we don't, we are actually giving up our birthright as spiritual beings, and we're simply accepting the lie that we're just a body rattling around this old planet. That's far beneath our actual capabilities. So by practicing the esoteric teaching, we'll come to gradually realize all these things in practice and really attain our perfect bodies. We hope you've enjoyed this edition of My Perfect Body. This is David Hughes, your host, reminding you to visit us on the web at esotericteaching.org.